Okay. Okay. So happy New
Mike,
Year to everybody.
one of the first scriptures that I remember when I was first started getting into Clayton was it talked about seek first the kingdom of heaven,
Yeah.
and all other things to be given unto you, done unto you. I
Yeah.
remember listening to a podcast from someone, I think it was from Australia, and they talked about if you're really seeking God's kingdom sincerely, and that's your whole life,
Mm.
and really you can almost judge as a way of looking as a barometer of how your life is going with God is that you're not going to have to ask for other things because you don't have to worry about that anymore. They're
Mm.
all being taken care of. And
Yeah.
that's a good measure of where your state is. Then I look at, and I always look at that and I'd say, oh, geez, I'd like to ask for this, but no, I'm just going to keep seeking God. But then I also see the other scripture where it talks about you have not because you ask not.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to just kind of get
Mm.
and
Yeah.
your own experience on that, your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. I use that scripture very much as a foundational scripture for my Ketubah and my sort of relationship with God, and that's very much about my needs. And there are the basic needs it talks about there, obviously, is food and clothing and housing and the basic needs. It isn't talking about every single thing that we might be seeking God about or asking Him for, specifically in our relationship. It's not really talking about everything there. It's talking about the things that will distract us because we're trying to meet our own needs in those areas as a priority, rather than putting first His kingdom, so that in agreement, if I seek first the priority of His kingdom in the new covenant, in a covenant relationship, then He is available for me to meet the needs, not the wants, of course, because needs and wants are obviously totally different things. So I use that as a foundation, and I do hold God to that. It's part of my sort of a contract with Him. But what is the kingdom? And that really is, and it's not just seek first the kingdom, it's seek first the kingdom and His righteousness. So there's more to it than just, hey, I'm going to seek first the kingdom. What is the kingdom that you're seeking first, and how do you do it from the perspective of righteousness? Well, righteousness means, in one sense, your identity. You are the righteousness of God in Christ, so you've been made righteous in Him. So, but really, the essence of righteousness is love. I mean, the perfect expression of righteousness is love. So really what it's saying is, if you seek for God's kingdom, therefore the realm that He rules in, then in love, then everything will be added. Now that's not automatic for everybody, without a doubt. I mean, it's like we all have to check our hearts whether we're operating in love, whether the motives of my heart in asking or seeking is love rather than selfishness, because there can be no selfishness in seeking first the kingdom. I can't be seeking first the kingdom, oh, so God will bless me. I need to know God will bless me because I'm loved, and it's part of my identity as a child of God to receive the blessing of God. So it's making sure that we don't have wrong trading motives in this, because it is a trade. You're seeking for something and you're expecting something in return. So we just have to make sure that what we're expecting in return isn't motivated out of the wrong motive and the wrong heart, and not out of love. So I certainly use this scripture and the relationship and truth of that scripture in my own relationship with God all the time. It's the basis of my Ketubah relationship with God, but that also carries with it an understanding of the new covenant, an understanding of my eternal destiny as well that goes with it. So if I'm going to seek first His kingdom, I'm going to have to understand government because there's no end to the increase of his kingdom or the increase of his government. Therefore, I need to understand, if I'm going to do that, I have to learn how to legislate his kingdom. So I need to see his rule in my life. So if he's not on the seat of rest and the government in my spirit, then none of that is going to work. Because it primarily, that's the kingdom in me. The kingdom of God is in me. The kingdom of God in me, I have to open my first love door and let him take the rule of my life by me surrendering the seat of rest and government to him, and then I trust him. If I don't do that, none of the rest of it will work. So and I'm not saying that someone may have a simple faith in engaging that scripture and it works for them at a level. But once you begin to understand what the kingdom is and our responsibility in the kingdom as sons of God and the legislative responsibility that comes with sonship, it's not just, well, I'm a baby. That may work when I'm an immature child who is not yet in possession of the fullness of my inheritance. But when I start to mature, then the responsibility of that maturity and sonship becomes important to understand and be willing to embrace. So it's okay, so well, I seek first your kingdom, but what does that actually mean? And the more you understand what it means, the more responsibility that revelation brings to you. And of course, the more access you have to all the resources of that kingdom to enable you to fulfill that. So, you know, I still go and ask of God lots of things every day. You know, what is your will for me today? You know, what's my mandate for today? I go and ask him that. I don't automatically assume that it'll just magically appear in my mind. I have a relationship in which I go and seek that, and he releases that and reveals it to me. But I would say, does it actually, is it a barometer? I think you have to be careful in looking at that, because what does it say? In Acts it says, through many tribulations I enter the kingdom. So we know that God brings maturity to us as we learn to have dominion, so we have to subdue and overcome things. So the absence of problems or issues is not a barometer. In probably the other way round. The more mature we get, the more things we get to subdue and overcome, and the stronger we become in administrating the kingdom. So I don't, in my own life, I do not ask God, or I do not frame my life to remove all the obstacles, because I know those obstacles enable me to grow and mature. So I don't do that. I could, you know, in what I do in frame of my own life, I certainly embrace obstacles and as opportunities to subdue them, learn, grow, and become stronger in my dominion over my own life. I do frame that I will have all the resources, wisdom, insight, understanding, knowledge, counsel, everything the seven spirits of God release to me, and everything I have for my relationship with wisdom to enable me to overcome, to subdue, to find a solution to every problem. And because I'm in the realm of heaven and my spirit is there in that realm before everything takes place in this realm, then I'm expecting it to be available to me instantly here when I need it. So a flow from heaven's realm into this realm to enable me to overcome and subdue and flow and be a gateway of heaven on the earth. So it depends what the barometer is. You know, is it always going to be high pressure and sunshine? Well, I don't think so, because I think God wants us to still some storms and learn what it is to take authority and still the storm. That's what Jesus taught his disciples to do. You know, so I think it's a good question, and it's certainly a key area And I think it goes very well with understanding having a ketubah, which forms the foundation of what we do to frame our life, because that is our understanding of our relationship, my expectations of God. And when I have expectations of God, then they are the hope that becomes the substance of faith, or faith becomes the substance of those hopes. So I need to have hopes. What are my expectations, so that faith can produce that and produce the reality of it in my life? Because God rewards those who come to him in faith, believing that he's going to engage. So it's quite an interesting area, but yeah, I think it would be a little bit simplistic just to say everything's going well, so that's a proof that I must be seeking first the kingdom, because I think the kingdom is about dominion and rule, and that does not preclude having opposition. It just means we have everything we need to overcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess I saw it as more of a simplistic thing. I understand the problems and the pressures because that feels resistance and stress. But I saw it more as I looked after or dealt with the kingdom that was programmed in me, he looks after me. And
Yeah.
through that, and I guess so I look at it more, I look after what I'm supposed to do, he looks after me. And I might overcome it by flow in him, which I'm going to see him looking after me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I am totally in faith with that. It is part of my relationship with God, in which I am fully expectant for him to look after me. And when things are not in alignment with that, then I find out why. Now, sometimes that may be my issue, because there may be something that's a legal right the enemy has to block or stop or hinder. I need to remove that. It's never his issue, because it's never God's issue, but it may be he's wanting me to mature. So at the level that I understand seeking his kingdom and outworking that right now, at times he gives me some encouragement to go deeper and to engage the kingdom at another level, which is maturity and coming into sonship and a level of sonship. But I certainly have that as an expectation in my own life, and at times, when things go wrong, or when things don't quite add up, then I have a sort of checklist or a framework in which I can assess why. And this can be on this isn't all about super spiritual things. It can be very practical. So, and I have an illustration of this. I had last year I bought a pond thing. It was like a water feature, which included sort of a waterfall, but it had like a pond thing for fish, and you could see through the side of it, and it was on our decking, and we see out the window, and it lit up at night. It had this sort of pump attached to it, and everything was working fine. For the first 6 months, everything was happy, and then the pump stopped working. So it was like, okay, and I sort of commanded it to work a few times, and it didn't. I then, cleaned it out, looked at it, found that the power was getting to it. Obviously, something was wrong. It was still under guarantee. So I went back to the shop and said, the pump stopped working. They said, well, bring the pump in and we'll exchange it for another one. I thought, well, okay, that's fair enough. Yeah. But then when I came to take the pump out, I found that it was not a very simple process, and in fact I couldn't actually take the pump out, because I followed the instructions of how to put it in, and you couldn't take it out without removing the liner, which was actually filled with water. So I had to drain the thing, and when I started draining it, I tried to drain it and I ripped it, and then it's like, then oh, what am I going to do with all the fish? So it's like all this sort of like, this is a hassle. Now I was on holiday. It wasn't a great hassle, but I was annoyed that now I had a thing that wasn't working, and so I quickly put all the fish in a bucket, went next door saying, "Have you got a pond?" And they said yes. I said, "Would you take some fish?" I said, "Oh, our pond's been renewed. We haven't got any fish in it." So I said, "Well, will you put some fish in your pond because I don't want them to die?" So I went through this whole process. It all sort of outworked, and then it was like, okay, what's going on here? This is more hassle than it should be. So what is God trying to do here? So I sought him, looked into what was going on behind the scenes. I found a couple of things which were obstacles, and then I began to legislate. Actually, I want a whole new pond. I don't want to go and have to go and buy a new liner. Actually, I want a new pond. Is there a way of getting a new pond? So I went into the shop, and because I now had some legislation that I had the right to a new pond, because actually the anodized aluminium surface of this pond had faded. So God reminded me that I told them this, but I hadn't followed it up. So I went in the shop and said, "Actually, do you remember that I told you that the top had thing?" I said, "Oh, bring the whole thing in and we'll give you a new one." So I had to do some things, and then I had to use the authority I had to bring blessing into it, and I did. And so I took the thing in, and they gave me a whole new thing, and they actually gave me an upgraded pump, better than the pump that I had before. So I was blessed at the end of it, but I had to go through a process. Now I was never quite satisfied with the thing in the first place, because it didn't quite. It wasn't quite as I expected it to be. So now I've got a brand new one with all the experience of the old one to make sure that when I put it together, it's going to be better than the first one. So in the end, I have a result, but there was a process to go through, and in those sorts of things, you have to be really aware of what it is that you're going to learn and what you're going to get at the end. Because I could have missed out on a whole load of things by shortcutting the process, or getting frustrated. Oh, I better go and buy a new one, or actually, well, no, I'm not going to have one because it's too much hassle. I could have let those frustrations hindered me operating in righteousness. So I was seeking first the kingdom. Here were some hassles. Why are the hassles? Actually, God's blessing was that this would be actually not substandard or not working. Now, my hassle was, okay, if I have to send this back, I have to drain it. I'm going to lose all the fish. It's like, I'm just going to put up with the fact that the color has changed, and it shouldn't have done. So I was putting up with something which was less than God's best, and actually what I considered to be best, which was the thing that was going to work. So I took on a mindset was that I'm going to settle for less than the best. So God used the situation to remind me not to have that mindset, but to have the mindset of, you need to administrate this so that you get justice into this situation and you get the fullness of what belongs to you, which I'd let go. So the enemy had an accusation against me because I had taken on a mindset that was, oh, it's okay, you don't have to have the best in this situation. So the whole process reminded me of the importance of making sure I have the right mindsets, the right way of thinking about it, and that I have the authority to administrate it to get the right result. And it was a long, drawn-out process, but God reminded me in the process that this is a significant thing to learn, because you're going to have other situations that are not necessarily the best. What are you going to do about it next time? Are you going to settle for second best, or are you going to make sure that you see justice and you're going to get what is fully entitled to you as your inheritance? So I I have sort of a reflective pathway that enables me to just sort of look at those type of things so I can learn from them. Because I don't take anything as a coincidence or just, okay, that just happens. I want to make sure that I am ruling in my life and I'm not subject to anything outside of that rule, and I'm learning how to do it. And this is an instance where actually it was my wrong attitude to it that allowed the enemy to rob me and eventually get to the point where I was completely robbed. This thing no longer worked. In fact, it was broken, ripped, and was never going to work again. So the only way I was going to get it was to spend more money. Well, actually now I've got a brand new one and a better pump, and I didn't have to spend anything, you know, but I did have to administrate it to bring that about. So I tend to learn a lot about those type of things by having a relationship with God, which enables me to have that sort of feedback mechanism, you know, in everything. You know, but it comes out of the same basic experience. I seek first the kingdom, and I expect things to be provided. But I have to cooperate with that. And in this instance, my mindset wasn't right, and therefore the result wasn't right because I had allowed it. It wasn't God's problem, it was mine. And it got pretty extreme until I faced that issue and found out why the problem was there. Because, you know, I could have just, oh, I'm wiping my hands of this, forget it, I'm not bothered about a pond, you know. But I didn't, you know, and now I've learned, and now I've got something better than I had in the first place. You know, so.
Would it be as simple as whenever you become, say yourself personally, unsettled about something seems out of whack in your life or going around you, you're just going back to God and saying, "What are you trying to show me? Are you trying to show me anything?"
Yeah, absolutely. And that is again having a relationship in which we can feed back honestly and openly and be accountable for what's going on without fear that God is going to have any negativity towards us. He had no negativity towards me in this situation. He just wanted me to have the best. I was stopping him giving me the best because my attitude wasn't right, you know. So, and I wasn't listening, you know, because he had to get to the point where actually you've lost the whole thing now. So that then it's like, oh, that's not right. Now I'm at a situation where, you know, I've got to deal with this differently. Well, I could have solved that problem a lot earlier, you know, if I'd listened and asked for the wisdom and insight I needed to go and get a replacement as soon as I recognized that actually I was entitled to one, because it wasn't fit for purpose, you know. But I'd accepted, oh, that's all right, it's too much hassle to bother, you know. Well, actually, I don't want to have that attitude. Nothing should be too much trouble to get God's best in life. So it is learning, as you say, just to ask, you know, actually, is there something that I need to learn in this situation that I will be better equipped to handle things in the future, you know. But in it, you have to be willing to, you know, sometimes eat some humble pie and admit, actually, no, this was my issue here. I could have solved this actually back in August if I'd followed through the process then, but I didn't, and, you know, it just got worse until in the end, although what seemed like a bad thing, actually God brought good out of it and got me back to giving me the best. You know, I could have just probably short-circuited that whole process and caused myself less grief if I dealt with it in the original situation, you know, but I didn't. So, but I've learned, you know, and I think, you know, I try and see opportunities in a lot of situations where I can turn any sort of trauma into transformation, and learn from situations so I can have insight and wisdom to deal with them better next time, and to find out, okay, is God using this situation to train me? Is the enemy using this situation to rob me? I need to discern what's going on so that I can take the correct path into it, out of it. So yeah.
So, Mike, if something happens over and over again, that's probably God trying to bring you back and say, okay, let's take care of this.
It's either that, or it's the enemy has a legal right and he keeps using it until we remove it. So you've always got these two things, and I use my relationship with the Spirit of the Lord to give me insight into that, because I want to know what God is doing, and I want to know what God's motive in something is, and the Spirit of the Lord will give me insight into that. And I think I've sort of explained this before, but if I was ministering to somebody, someone asked me to help them, I wouldn't just say, oh yeah. I would find out, God, what are you doing in this situation? Are you using this situation to mature this person? So if I get them out of this situation, then I'm short-circuiting what you're trying to do, so I certainly don't want to do that. So I find out. And then I can say, actually, God doesn't want to take you out of this situation. What he wants to do is to teach you to overcome in this situation and learn through it. So I'll walk with you through it, but I'm not going to try and get you out of it. Now, I need to understand what God is doing. Now, if when I sought the Spirit of the Lord's saying, actually, this is the enemy, then I would certainly say to that person, yeah, let's deal with why the enemy's got access here so that you can be free from enemy attacks. So yes, sometimes we get to go around the mountain a number of times until we actually put it into right perspective and deal with it, and God will give us that opportunity. We never fail, we just get to take the test again and again and again and again until we pass. So God will always give us an opportunity of learning. But sometimes, actually, it may just be that the enemy's got a legal right. And again, looking at the situation, it depends what it is. God will never bring sickness on you to teach you. So I always know that if sickness comes, not that I get sick, but if I see it in other situations, I know that the enemy is doing something, and he must have a right to do it. So we need to find out why. So it's two different things. And I think, again, it's just knowing what those things are, and you sort of learn to discern those things quicker and easier and become more insightful into understanding the ways of the kingdom, and your spirit has a sense of peace, that I can be at peace even if something is going wrong if I have an understanding of what I need to do in that situation. If I don't understand anything, then it's really difficult to be at peace. So it's really key to develop that relationship in which we do get the insight that we need to help us walk in it. But I think there's a high level of immaturity in people that look at the surface and don't go beneath the surface. You can look at the cover of a book, but actually, unless you open the book and look inside, you don't know what's in there, because there's no guarantee that the cover actually reflects what's in there until you open it, because sometimes people put things under a different cover. So it's always God looks at the heart rather than just the externals, and we tend to have been taught to look at the externals and make assumptions based on what we see externally, rather than actually let's go and look what's going on underneath, because that requires more reflection and meditation and a willingness to engage. But it does bear a lot of benefits if we're willing to learn how to do that in our lives. So then we'll stop getting annoyed and angry with God, which often we do because we're not aware of what he's doing, and we don't think it's fair. Well, actually, the kingdom is about justice and righteousness, and actually a lot of the times when I don't think it's fair, You know, it's because my attitude isn't right towards it. It's because God is always fair, you know, but the enemy is never fair. So I have to work out what's going on when I have those situations of injustice, because God will never act injustice, but injustice can take place in my life if I'm not administrating justice. You know, and God will allow the enemy to use the legal rights he's got. There's a limit on what he can do, but he will allow the enemy to do that, which then should prompt us not to be angry at God that something bad has happened, but to identify why it was allowed to happen in the first place, which is usually because there is a right for that to take place. You know, so I've learned not to jump to conclusions or to make assumptions which cause me to react in a wrong way. Generally, now I'm not perfect, and sometimes, you know, having my illustration before, I could have saved myself a whole load of problems if I'd listened to my own advice. You know, but you know, I've learned now I will be much more astute next time if something happens, and I will look at the situation a little bit more with a little bit more insight and revelation than have, because I've learned. Now I have that as part of my understanding, whereas before I wouldn't have seen it quite in the same way. You know, but it's interesting. You know, we do have to have a framework in which we live from, and you know, having a basic framework that outworks from the new covenant and understanding what it is to be in the new covenant, having a marriage contract, a ketubah, certainly helps when it comes to our relationship with God and our expectations. So I would encourage everyone to spend the time developing that in line with their destiny, so that they have a real clear framework in which to operate, and which you can then shape and frame your own lives from that framework. Because we're responsible, and the more mature we get, the less God will do it for us. Yeah, and that's you know, it's like at some stage we've got to get out of the nest and fly. You know, and it doesn't seem very nice of the mother eagle to kick the fledgling out of the nest, but that's what she has to do at some stage. Otherwise, the thing will sit there waiting for her to feed it all the time, and it will just get fat. You know, it needs to fly, so she kicks it out the nest, usually from a great height, and it certainly learns to pick up the wind and the thermal, and to at least glide initially. And I think God does that with us. He wants us to fly, you know, so he doesn't want us to be like chickens pecking on the ground. He wants us to be soaring like eagles. So he uses situations to help us to do that. You know, so.
Mike, when you mentioned Ketubah, you've also talked or you've written recently about you really need to put together a Ketubah for your ecclesia. Have you done? Is that your experience? You've actually put together a Ketubah for your ecclesia?
Yeah. I mean, I did my personal Ketubah in 2011. It got offered up to God in 2012. I haven't looked at it since. Well, I have now, but I hadn't looked at it until a few weeks ago. And I looked at it because I was teaching on Ketubah. So I was teaching a 4-part series on Ketubah. I wanted to give some examples of you know, what a Ketubah looked like, what was in it, the sort of things within it. So I thought, okay, well, I'll use my own Ketubah. And so I went back and looked at it and pulled out some examples so that people could see, well, this is the stuff. I realized, although I burnt it, offered it up as an offering to God in 2012, in February 2012, I hadn't looked at it since. You know, I still had it on my computer, but I hadn't opened it and I hadn't looked at it. I found that the majority of things that I wrote then, which I wasn't doing or operating in, I am now, and I found that I'm using what was in that ketubah, which is in my spirit, to frame my whole life. So it was a really interesting exercise, because I just saw how much I've matured and changed over the last 3 years from that ketubah being part of who I am, and I outwork it. About when I knew I was going to teach on it, and I haven't taught on it before, and I've never actually taught it here, I shared that with our leadership, with the bench of 3. We took it to the bench of 12, and said, look, we're going to need to do a ketubah for us as a church, as a ministry. Each of the mountains really needs to look at a ketubah from their mountain perspective. You know, we spent an away day, and we did a brainstorming thing of, okay, what's all the stuff that we should put into our ketubah? Some people recognize that they struggled even with the concept of having accountability with God and expectations of the things God should give, because it was like a religious mindset that was, well, you can't do that with God. So that was quite interesting. But we had a whole list, and we have a collaborative Google document in which we have put those things into it, and we're adding each of the mountain perspectives to it, so that we will have a marriage ceremony, because part of our destiny and part of our book, our scroll, has on it a page which says you are invited to the marriage under a ketubah and a huppah of Freedom Church and the Lord. And that came probably 3 years ago, and we have not been in a place to actually have that, even though I saw it, shared it a number of years ago, have not felt comfortable to pursue it because we've not been ready. So now I'm encouraging all our the church to produce their own personal ketubah, and we will have a corporate ketubah for that ceremony when it's the right time, and we will actually present it and engage God in another level of intimacy. So certainly it's absolutely vital to understand, but it's been a long process. You know, I've had to learn a lot of patience in this process, you know, because, you know, it's taken me from 2011, when I did my own personal ketubah, to 2015-16 to actually even teach it. You know, so, and I had no permission from God to teach it, even though I'd personally done it 4 years ago. I had no permission to teach it until now, because now is the time, and my expectation for this deepening level of intimacy now is at such that we will soon be doing this, and therefore I have an expectation that we will be ready, and that the people who will participate in it will also be at that point of maturity where they can do that in their own lives. But it takes time. You know, but certainly, you know, as in your own life, and you know, if you're part of a bench or involved in any sort of ecclesia, then having something to form the foundation of your expectations in relationship with God is absolutely vital, and will become even more so, I think, as we move forward now, because we have to take responsibility. And this gives us the framework in which we can do that, and which we have our expectations that God will release to us. You know, and our whole corporate ketubah is around us fulfilling our blueprint. You know, it's not about selfish things. It's like, give us all the resources that we need to fulfill the blueprint that you've given us. You know, we have expectations that align with that. It's not, oh, hey, we want to be a whole rich church, so give us a whole load of money or anything like that. It's, no, we need the resources to be able to do whatever God is calling us to do in alignment with our destiny, our scroll, the blueprint that we've been given. So we make the ketubah on the basis of that, not on human reasoning or some sort of religious ideal about what we should have and shouldn't have, but on the basis of what God says and what He's shown us to do. You know, but yeah, you know, definitely encourage you to do one for yourself and for the ecclesia, and then you have something really foundational in which everyone can then establish that for their own lives, because you have authority in it. Yeah.
So, Mike, that seems to be a point of maturing for, you know, sort of coming of age, maturing for an individual as well as an ecclesia. Because, you know, there's certain points at which you come and you just know that, okay, there's more, it's time to move on. It's, you know, you feel this little irking to, okay, where to go from here kind of thing. So what I'm hearing and what sort of confirmed to me that doing a ketubah for the group, you know, it's interesting Bill asked that question because we never, and that never even came up in our conversations or anything. So I find that really intriguing that, you know, doing a ketubah for the group, the ecclesia, seems to be a point of maturity, coming of age kind of thing, sort of framing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's not that. Well, I guess in a sense, you know, because I personally have embraced this, then, you know, others could have, I guess, personally pursued it themselves, but because I hadn't taught it, then no one had found that themselves. It only became something which was on people's radar when I shared with them what I was going to teach and the significance of that in our level in maturity, because obviously a baby would never produce a ketubah. A child who could not be married would never produce a ketubah. It was only when you got to the age where marriage was possible that the ketubah took on a significance. So I think there is definitely a maturing aspect to it, but I would say that we would certainly teach it to as part of our equipping track. You know, once people had done sort of the fresh start, and they would then look to engage maybe in base camp and look to build their relationship, whatever, it comes to a point where we will teach it. But I don't think it has to be, it's not like an age thing, as in, okay, well, you've been a Christian for 5 years now you can do your ketubah. You know, you can pursue it and be doing a ketubah after a month if you got to that point. You know, so it's more about your relationship with God than a time scale, and God can inspire you to produce a ketubah at any point. You know, if He prompts you that way. I think as a process, I think we will have to fit it into, okay, this is when we will begin to maybe offer that teaching, or people can engage it. Certainly, you know, as we look forward to that with others as people mature. But certainly I'm hoping and believing that people will mature a lot quicker once we have everything in place for them, and that passion and desire for God draws them to a deeper relationship. You know, and I think in essence, you know, we become children of God. We are, as part of the corporate nature of that, we are the bride of Christ, and I think God wants us to enter into a depth of relationship with His Son that goes deeper into becoming one with Him, being joined to the Lord in one spirit with Him, and all those things. So there is an element where, you know, that will grow. But I wouldn't want to hinder somebody producing a ketubah based on anything other than very clearly what God is saying. And I'm not saying that just because it took us 4 years to produce that corporately, that someone shouldn't, as an ecclesia basis, do that very quickly. Because if you have revelation and you have a blueprint, then you can certainly establish a ketubah, in the foundations of what you're doing, without a doubt. But I would say that you probably need to have done it yourself, so you have a testimony of it in your own life that then gives you authority when you then produce it in a corporate way. But yeah, certainly it's a very positive thing to have. And as I said, looking back over our own life over the last 3 years, most of the things that I wrote as expectations in 2011, I am now already walking in. And I actually, although I don't do it consciously by reading something, when I offered it up to God, it became part of me, and I have found that it is something that really releases that which I speak about and talk about and use as my everyday life, in terms of the kingdom and legislation in the kingdom, and my expectations. And I wouldn't say that everyone has to burn their ketubah for that to be his case. It was, I went through a particular process that's what God was inspiring me to do. And after that, I never felt drawn to go and look at it again. For others, it may be that you have it as a record and you read it and you confess it and you use it as a reference point many times during your journey. For me, it wasn't like that. Something happened when I really dealt with that area of my life. So.
One other follow-up question, Mike. You mentioned framing certain things in your day. So do you have active confessions that you do each day, or is it as you felt led each day, there are different confessions, or so is that how you frame up your day?
Well, I have, no, I don't use confessions, but I do use legislation that I have. So I use laws that have been made. I use my ketubah. I use my understanding of the new covenant. I use the relationship I have with God and my understanding of who He is and the nature of that. So literally, what I will do, I will go engage the ark of the presence of God. I will come to agreement and resonance with that. What am I mandated to do today? I open my heart. I'm looking for Him to write on the tablets of my heart that the desires of my heart will draw me towards the outworking of that. Now, I then take that to the four faces of God, and I want a heavenly governmental perspective to it. So I submit it. Now, I don't submit it and I have a whole list of things, but I submit it and I have an expectation that the kingdom order of Melchizedek type governmental perspective will be imparted to me. I then go deeper with it and I go take it back into eternity, and I stand in eternity so that I can get an eternal perspective, which will enable me to frame from looking at it in a different way. And I've grown in learning how to do all that, and I just then do instinctively what my spirit leads. I just do. So that may involve making declarations. It may involve reminding of decreeing. It may be prophesying, in a sense, what will be. I I have things that I am authorized to do all the time, but then I have also specific things that I am authorized to do, which are season sensitive or time sensitive from this perspective. But I want to make sure that I'm not doing it out of my knowledge of my soul. So I want my spirit to lead and direct rather than the wisdom that I have from a human perspective. I don't submit it to earthly wisdom. I have a lot of, I remember a lot, and I have a capacity to recall a lot of information, but I choose not to use any of that information in this process of framing my day. So I allow my spirit to have an eternal perspective, a kingdom governmental perspective, and then I outwork that. My Ketubah forms the foundation of that, and it will be different every day depending on what I do, and I don't have a set format. If what you're saying is, well, here's a load of declarations, I don't operate that way, although I make a lot of legislation which then I use, and I use that as my authority to decree or declare or call things into. I do a lot of calling things into existence. Now, at the moment, God has called me to legislate every 6 days a week, in addition to what I've already been doing. So I get each night to make legislation, to use legislation, to operate legislatively, because God has told me to give him half an hour every night, or 6 nights a week, because I get a day's rest. And I found that since I've been doing that, which I started last Monday, I have a whole host of legislation and a whole understanding of legislation specifically. I've made 2 specific laws. I have done several court cases. I have an insight into the obstacles and restrictions that I need to deal with as a result of becoming available to engage legislatively. A lot of that's directed towards the ecclesia here, which I've not shared with them yet. We've got a meeting tonight, a 12 meeting, which I'm going to share a lot of these things with them, from a view of, look, I've been doing a lot of legislation, I need to bring you up to date and make you aware of this. Do you want to receive this legislation so that we can all operate on it? Therefore, we have to agree it and bring it into our church, or I'm going to continue using the legislation myself. And no doubt, if I'm going to engage legislatively 6 days a week, then I'm going to have a mass of legislation to be able to use, either new or using existing legislation and using it to essentially change things, frame things, establish and administrate the kingdom. So yeah, I mean,
To the word I use, I didn't mean confessions, I mean decrees and declarations. So.
Yeah, but they're not, for me, they're not what they aren't. They're not written. I don't have them written. They are part of my spirit. Others do write them, and I've no problem. I just don't have written things that I use like that. Although I have the legislation written down, I don't take it out. I mean, the only thing I tend to use, which is a written thing, is the communion prayers and things. I have that as a reference point that I use when I embrace communion every day. As a ecclesia, we have a whole host of declarations which are used as a shield. Each of our mountains, our Spencer 7 and our 7 mountains, they each have declarations, because God told us that we needed to make declarations as a shield, an invisible shield that the enemy would not be able to penetrate. And it's the responsibility of each mountain to establish those declarations and use them. we have one mountain that's taken all the other declarations, and one person is using those declarations every day for all of them, but we encourage the mountains to take responsibility for using those declarations. Now, again, if you use a declaration often enough, then it becomes part of you and you don't necessarily need to read it. But we do have them, and we have a record of them for all, our benches to engage and access. So they are confessions, declarations, decrees. I just don't generally use them in a written form, but I allow my spirit to take everything that's been written and release it, whenever it needs releasing. But that's just me. So there's nothing wrong in having written declarations and decrees. I just want to make sure I don't get into a religious ritual and use them ritually, rather than them being spirit-led and directed from my spirit, which is why I'd rather be more spontaneous and just start decreeing, declaring from that. But certainly recently I produced a law which then I used, and of course and I immediately used it. I did have a reference there until I became familiar with it. Now it's part of what I have as revelation, and my spirit can release that on a daily basis if I need, whenever I need to do it. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Like, what are your mountains that you would have, for example, is your wife, your family, would be one of your mountains Mike Parsons would have. Would you make religious declarations of covering over those kind of things each day?
Yes and no. Again, as my spirit directs me to do things. So yes, I have a family mountain. Essentially what I'm looking to do is to create an atmosphere of kingdom authority around the spheres of government that I have, and therefore I legislate in heaven. I'm a gateway of heaven. As I become joined to the Lord, I'm really looking for my spirit to grow, encompass my soul and body, and that sphere of government is increasing. So yes, I encompass my home, my family, I encompass the church, I encompass our area, I encompass our region. At the moment, that's where my spirit is extending on a daily basis. I can also, because I have authorization, administrate into some national things and some international things in specific places that I've been authorized to have that authority. But I've yet to see my spirit grow to such extent that I can cover the whole nation. But I'm practicing covering the local area and the region, so that my sphere that I'm operating in becomes wider. Then I have to become sensitive to what's going on in that sphere, which will then prompt me to act. And I'm not at that stage. I don't think I've got the capacity to function in that as well as I would like to, but I'm practicing and looking to engage that. And I guess in God asking me to do things more legislatively, I think I will, because I'm going to put some specific time to it, probably become more sensitive to the things which are local and regional that I have insight into, and then I will have the authority to stop some things. Over the Christmas time, as a regional bench, we actually received some information that there were some things planned by the enemy, at the Christmas period, to disrupt and cause trouble. We again took that seriously, and as a regional bench, we went into the courts and remove some legal rights that the enemy had to do this, and stopped it happening. And therefore we had none of the disruption over the Christmas period that was planned by the enemy, because we took action. Now I can't say that I was given that insight, but I acted on the information that someone else brought and legislated into it. But I need to grow and mature in that at a different level. You know, a level that I'm receiving revelation of, you know, is not as strong or wide as what it will be, but I'm certainly practicing. Yeah.
Mike, you used the term, my spirit is encompassing. Does that mean your spirit is like overshadowing your mountain? Is that what it means?
Yeah, more that if you think about it in terms of the gateways picture, you have first love gate, I have my spirit and the spirit gates. What I'm doing is becoming joined to the Lord, so I'm engaging the river of life, I'm yoking myself to Jesus, I'm yielding the seat of rest and government to the Father, and they, as a bench of three, I then become in agreement with them. That opens, I become the fourth to open up my life to be that gateway for being one spirit to flow. So then I literally see my spirit growing to extend beyond my soul. So if you look at it from the gateways diagram, let's say my spirit is within the boundaries of my spirit, but the gates of my spirit are open. So the river of life, the me being one spirit, flows and goes around my soul, and then goes out around my body, and then wider into the spheres that I have. So it goes around my house, it goes around my family, it goes around the church, it goes around the local area, and I deliberately sort of expand it, grow it, sort of cause it to expand and come around those things. So rather than it being something which is on my mountain, it's more in agreement with God. I begin to do this on the earth. So I'm extending my tent pegs, if you like, using Isaiah, was it 54:2, I think, expanding the territory that my spirit has access to bring the kingdom into. Now, there are lots of other people, I'm sure, who are doing this. So I'm not saying that, it's down to me to legislate my nation, but I do know that I have, responsibility locally, and I need to learn how to receive insight, or that my spirit will become spiritually sensitive to things in that area that it's got authority over, to pick up what I'm authorized to do, and therefore I will receive a mandate to be able to administrate into it. And as I say, I'm just, I've been expanding my spirit that way for quite a while, but it's started to get, go to a different realm, beyond, the sort of my own personal mountains to wider mountains that I'm part of. But certainly my own personal mountains will all be in heaven, and obviously I'm in heaven. So the thing is, I'm not stepping into heaven and stepping back out. My spirit is in heaven and is on my mountain, and therefore is flowing through me here. So there is a flow. I'm looking to become more sensitive to discern what it is I'm have a mandate to do, or to pick up a lack of peace or disturbance in the force. It's a very sort of appropriate term for sort of the force awakens. It's like there's a sense where in my sphere of influence, if there is a disturbance, I need to be sensitive to pick it up. And practice becoming more sensitive to those things that are happening, whether in the atmosphere or whatever they might be, so that I can take responsibility to deal with them. As I'm directed. I'm not going to be responsible for dealing with everything, just how it aligns with my destiny and what God's calling me to do. But I am practicing and willing to take responsibility for a wider area than I would have been before. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I how I would see it working. Yeah.
So in a way, when you're opening up your gates, which automatically affect your areas of responsibility that He's given you for this point in time, or it's automatically flowing out, and you're just listening for all of them. Generally, is there something you want to show me? Is there anything going on out of whack or whatever? Is it kind of like that, a process like that you're doing, or?
Well, it's less. Yes. That's the basic gist of it. But it's not always negative. There's the positive aspect to it about, okay, how do you want this sphere to be operating? So I don't, because I'm, I guess, become more integrated. See, I don't have to open my spirit, soul, body gates. They're open. I just have to keep the flow going. So I'm not doing the opening. I'm just flowing. So becoming one spirit and becoming integrated soul and body with my spirit, that's brought a oneness that now I don't sort of cognitively have to think about a lot of those things. I'm instinctively doing those things because my spirit is engaged. And a spiritual activity is not necessarily a cognitive one. So I've had to go through the process of dealing with the need to know cognitively to act. So now I just instinctively act from my spirit because my spirit is engaged in eternity and is engaged in the four faces of God and is in heaven on my thrones. There is a sense where I have an expectation of having everything I need, whether that be time, resource, information, relationship, whatever, to be able to do everything I'm called to do on a daily basis. So as I'm there, like for instance, I'm talking to you, my soul is engaged with you, my consciousness as my soul, my mind is focused on talking to you. I am not using the knowledge that I have stored within my mind and the neural pathways that I've connected to that knowledge to answer you. I'm expecting all the things I need to say to you to be before, because heaven operates at a faster speed of light, creative light, therefore it's always available before created light in this realm. Because my spirit is there, I'm expecting my spirit to have all the resources needed to release that through me so I can speak to you without actually thinking about what I'm going to say or without actually trying to remember things from previous experiences to say. I just want to flow. And in doing that, then I'm very much expecting the insight and wisdom and knowledge and understanding and counsel to be available to me to release. And that's how I operate. So that, quite often I will say things that I've never said before, that I don't know cognitively, but I do know spiritually, and then I will write it down and actually then go back and actually think, wow, that was really good. That was interesting. I didn't know that before cognitively. Now I do. Now I'm going to make sure I understand it. So I find that I make a lot of notes because I'm sort of flowing from heaven, that some of those things are new to me in a mind consciousness state. So when I engage in the realms of heaven, and particularly when I engage in eternity, I leave my mind behind. I don't try and go to figure it out. I go to try and receive spiritual insight to my spirit without my mind being involved in the process. And later on, my mind will come into the process when my spirit releases that revelation. So my framing of things does not come from, okay, here is all the things I should frame from because I did it yesterday. It comes from, this is the beginning for today, and therefore I am going to use that and instinctively flow that out. Sometimes that will mean that I will say things, declare things, call things into being, but not from a, well, here's my memory of my list that I need to do things from. It will be a flow and an instinctive flowing from my spirit rather than a drawing on the knowledge which is in my mind. You know, and I do have a large capacity to keep knowledge. And if you ever play me at Trivial Pursuit or anything like that, you know, I remember a lot of things which I have access to, but I don't use it in a spiritual capacity because I want to operate spiritually and I want it to flow out of that rather than just coming up with a good solution, you know, which has meant I've had to change how I do a lot of things to be less that way inclined, and you know, and I had to surrender my soul and deal with my soul so that my soul did not need to know in which to function, and now comes into agreement and helps me and cooperates with me rather than keeps asking questions or tries to get in the way, you know. But that's taken, you know, the last 3 years of living that out to get to the point where I am right now. That's not perfect, but it's better than it was, and I'm learning, you know, all the time. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mike. That's very good.
Okay. All right. Oh, times are gone.